Hello everyone, this is 3D printed animatronic creature part 27 core making. I hope y'all are doing well. Appreciate all the comments, subscribers, and I've been dealing with medical things and trying to get better and slowly improving. But this is what I've been working on. It's time to make the core. And I've been, as y'all have been seeing, that I've been making some test designing of the so-called mold. And this mold is going to be, where I make the mother mold that holds the silicone so I can mold the so-called creature. It needs to be, I guess, the right size for me to achieve this. And if that's going to be the right size, I got to make the core the correct size. And and I've been looking at printers, and as far as an FDM printer, and you got to realize that, the number one printer in the country right now is the Bamboo, and it's usually the X1 Carbon. But you know, and me personally, as far as printing, or my main thing that I care about is printing. It's not speed and it's not multicolor. My thing is quality. I just want it to be right and the correct measurement, and it needs to be that perfect for me. And that's what I really care for. And we know that there's a lot of copycats because if there's something good, they're going to copy it. But it doesn't mean it's going to copy the quality. I mean, you can have one bigger than Bamboo, but it doesn't mean that it's going to print just like the Bamboo. And I've seen some FDM prints come from Bamboo that was really beautiful and pretty close, or to say, as far as organic sculptures and stuff, it's pretty close to, the early resin stuff. And that's pretty a bold statement for me to say that, but it's come a long way, and Bamboo's kind of done it. Now, Bamboo has other big or large printers, but all the printers, when I say large, they all go by so-called size, which is 256. And that's 256 by 256 by 256. So if I was to get a Bamboo, I need to make this size of this core. I'm saying 250 millimeters, and then I'll have a little give there. Now, the even though the mold pieces are going to be laying on top of the build platform, as far as the on the core has a plate, and the mother mold parts are going to be laying upon that. So it can be actually taller than the measurement. But as far as them on there, but I'm not going to be printing them. I'm going to be printing them individually. But as you see here, I'm having to make adjustments to my chest piece. And I'm having to do that because if I'm going to do the so-called core at a 250 uh, build plate, I need to make sure I can get it in that size. So what I've done is I've changed this chest plate. Everything else is the same, but as you see here, I'm doing editing to where what I'm doing here is I'm adding a lip. And when I make the skin, you'll see later on, after I get this, finalized here, and I got to finish this, so I'll have this STL file available. But you can see how much I've changed it. But what this does is when the silicone skin is poured, it will go underneath there a little bit and create a lip. That way, when you stretch the so-called silicone skin over the whole bust area, it will have, a kind of a physical locking point, and that's why I'm designing a lip to this. But once again, as you see here, here's some some kind of test frames that I'm doing, and I thought about making it kind of a split level design, but then and having you know, the basic thing is what I'm trying to achieve here is I'm making sure that the core, and this would be the core part, that the core, when it's inserted into the mold, that it's going to be locked in place and it won't be moving around or, a lot of times you have to have screw points just to hold your core in place. But this is all going to be mounted on this so-called plate. But here is a lot of it's not set yet, but I'm having to make the block out areas. Anything that's going to be open space, any holes like for instance, where the eyelids are, it's all open space there. All that needs to be blocked out because I'm making this into one piece. It'd be one mesh that's going to be printed. And once again, you don't want any artifacts inside. You don't want no like a shell. All of it has to be watertight, one piece. And this is the core to where I'm going to be also sculpting on. So when I sculpt on it, I'll have the same plate as the core as the sculpture. And that way, when I mold the sculpture, the core will fit into the socket with the plate. And all these areas here that are high and how I'm designing it, the silicone that I'm going to be cast or molding in, which is going to be hugging these points to where it's going to also help keep the so-called, it's going to be stationary, the core will be, and when it's inserted into this mold. And then that way, later on, as you see here, I'm removing the so-called shell part of the whole mesh here for this neck, and in that way it will be watertight and it will be no problems because if you have an artifact inside something, as you know, when you go to check your meshes or your your files to a SDL file, you'll have a problem in saying it's not going to print correct. So you just have to check that. But if you design the whole thing where you're not having these troubles, that way you ain't gonna be messing around trying to fix crap. But everything has to be center. I mean, perfectly center. I don't want to be a millimeter off on one of these pieces. It needs to be perfectly center. And then all these things have to be edited right, so all you see is the so-called mesh from the outside. That's all you're going to see for it to be printed. Now here is the build platform of the bamboo printer. And now I'm making adjustments where I actually want this placed. Now it can go out further outwards, like front of the face, but it's how wide and how tall. And as you see here, I'll be able to, now this is just the core. Now the core is not going to be molded. It's going to be the sculpture that's on the core that's going to be molded. So I got to make sure that I do this correct because I'm going to have space for the silicone to mold the sculpture. And that's going to probably be close to maybe a ½ inch thickness all the way around. Now the skin thickness is going to be anywhere from 3 to 5 millimeters thickness, but it might be a little thinner. But it's just I'm just trying to get this thin enough, especially on the eyelids. That's going to probably be the thinnest area, and probably the lips too. But now I have not made the block out for the teeth yet, and that has to be where when I make the block out for the teeth, I want the so-called forks that move the lips. I want them to be like covered to where they have their own little individual socket into the silicone. That way it can be secured in place, and then I can also add some silicone adhesive if needed. But all these are going to have like you know kind of their own little socket to move the so-called you know that part of the skin. But like in some of these sockets that I'm covering, they might go in a little deep because like the center brow here, for instance, I don't want it to move the other part, the other brow. Like I could just move that center brow. I don't want the other brows to move too. I just want that skin, that area to move. But this is going to be a lot of work here because I got to tie everything together. I got to tie in the main skull to the eye plate, and the eye plate to the so-called uh, the lip mechanism area, and all that has to be, what's covered and what's behind what's covered is going to have to be removed. So it's going to be a lot of cleanup to do, but this is the key. This is the a key point of this so-called animatronic for the skin to fit it correctly. It's like making a life cast of an actor and doing some kind of makeup effect on it. It has to be correct. I shoot a lot of these videos. Anytime that I'm modeling or making any kind of designs, I use a capture software called OBS, and it's a great, you know, it's a great capture software. It just documents everything. But as you see here, here's all the so-called plates that I've made to cover any of the sockets, and I still have some other things that I have to cover. As far as the bottom lip needs to be covered, and that has to be modeled, and all that. Like I said, once again, the teeth is going to have to be done to where it needs to be blocked out. But this is kind of a critical part of this animatronic. But I appreciate y'all, and thank you for once again for all the get well wishes and the condolences since my mother passed away. But everything's coming along, and I hope this helps y'all. And I'll have another video up really soon. Thanks. Later.